John O'Leary, certainly, and Lorraine Canadarud on my team. And then Department of Commerce, Deputy Commissioner Fred Anderson. Let me just say a few introductory remarks. I really want to have this, as much as possible, be for stakeholders to give us information and present on this topic. But let me just say a little bit about why this is important for DHS. Our Own Your Future project is a multi-year initiative that Lorraine has been just fearless on leading for years now, and has kept it up during the pandemic. It is not an easy job to do during the pandemic. It's really meant to be partnership ideas. How do we build state and federally funded options for long-term care that don't rely on Medicaid, that don't add to our long-term fiscal pressures? How do we educate households and families about what their options and their funding needs might include? And more recently, I'm really excited that we were able to have the 2021 legislature authorize new research and innovation kind of ideas on home and community-based services, thinking about financing and demographics and the economics of long-term care, and the actuarial and research needs of, what does the next sort of decade look like? How do we build a long-term care system in Minnesota that has sustainable funding, that recognizes older adults' needs, recognizes the fact that so much of the population is going to experience some kind of long-term care need, and also empowers them to really decide for themselves with their family, what does that care look like? How do we make sure that they have access to care at home, to caregiving support? If it's a community, doesn't necessarily want to utilize residential services, how do we support them in an independent way? And as needs go up and costs go up, what are the options that the family members and caregivers have available to them? So it's a really holistic approach, and this is kind of the starting point of that conversation, to sort of hear, at least from some of the stakeholders, and I think will be very valuable to also hear from legislators. We've built time into the schedule to hear your views as well about how we invest these dollars and the research models in a way that will be most productive for making policy choices. So with that, let me turn it over to Fred Anderson from the Department of Commerce for some remarks from their perspective as well.
Okay, excuse me. Thanks a lot, Dan. As Dan mentioned, my name is Fred Anderson. My current title is the Chief Life Actuary with the Minnesota Department of Commerce. I've been actively involved on the long-term care issues, whether my title is Deputy Commissioner or Chief Life Actuary, so that really hasn't changed. My focus during my regulatory career has been on financial stability of insurers, including those with long-term care business. And in recent years, I've gotten more involved with innovation efforts related to long-term care. So these innovation efforts range from wellness benefits to reducing costs to providing more efficient ways to fund long-term care. So I'm going to provide a little bit of background, and then I'll hand it over to Robin Rowan for her introduction of the industry team. As many of you know, there are a lot of challenges facing states and our citizens on this long-term care issue. As Dan mentioned, as baby boomers age, there'll be greater demand for long-term care services. Some of these services are provided by families, and this can cause various stresses, including the ability to balance work and caring for an older loved one. Long-term care needs for a person and their costs can be unpredictable. In some cases, it's $0. In many cases, it could be $400,000 for a fairly typical Alzheimer's case. And not many people have $400,000 to set aside to care for themselves or a loved one. And cases of these magnitudes are fairly common. They tend to happen around 10% of the time for seniors. So those are two ways of addressing long-term care needs, the family providing care and relying on savings. And obviously there are limitations on both. So people also have the option of doing some other types of planning. And, you know, usually when people plan in this manner, they have no intention of ever going on Medicaid. But due to, you know, the main issue of the cost being so high in many cases, a lot of people end up having to rely on Medicaid because of either the rigor of care or the cost of long-term care needs that exceeded what they either planned for or can't afford. So today we'll focus on funding long-term care needs through some combination of private markets and public programs. Regarding private market products, we've seen successes and challenges. So tens of billions of dollars have been paid to policyholders to fund their long-term care needs through private insurance products. But we've also seen increased costs lead to substantial rate increases, which have put policyholders in a tough position. There currently is a public program that provides a big portion of long-term care, as I mentioned, that being Medicaid, and that's supported by the federal government and each state government. So as baby boomers age, you have more people who need long-term care, and the cost to government, even under the current system, will continue to increase. There are lots of people, fortunately, thinking of creative ways to develop a more efficient system for addressing the increasing long-term care needs, and one of these venues is Own Your Future. There are also people in the private insurance industry and all over the place investing time and money on this issue. We'll hear some ideas today at various levels of development. Some already are in place that we can learn lessons from, and some are at early stages that we need more analysis and discussion about before going live with. So we'll start by hearing from Robin Rowan and a panel of insurance industry experts regarding their perspective on the future role of private long-term care insurance and how it can potentially integrate with public funding approaches to best meet the needs of Minnesota seniors. So I'll now hand it over to Robin.
Thanks, Fred, and hello, everyone. As Fred said, I'm Robin Rowan, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Insurance and Financial Services Council, or MIFSI. MIFSI members provide financial security for every stage of Minnesotans' life. We pay out $42.4 million a day to Minnesotans in benefits. We write life insurance, retirement savings, personal pension programs, supplemental benefits, paid family and medical leave, and of course, long-term care, which is why we are here today. Thanks to Fred and Dan and Lorraine, and of course, John O'Leary for his persistence and apparently eternal patience. We have a great panel here that I'm very excited about. We are going to do a slightly different approach. So we have the panel, which I'll introduce in a second. But then we also have what I'm referring to as a Greek chorus. I try to work in my English major whenever I can, of other experts that are on the call that can chime in to support the panel. They probably won't be singing. I try to get them to, but they won't. So on the panel, we are lucky to have Greg Gerlich with Northwestern Mutual. He's a vice president and actuary there. Craig Roars, who many of you Own Your Future folks know already, but he is head of marketing at Newman Long-Term Care. And Steve Spurka, who is vice president of health insurance products with Thrivens. And our Greek chorus members are Corey Anderson, who is the owner and founder of the Disability Geek. He's actually on here as just the Disability Geek. Eric DuPont with the Guardian Life Insurance Company. Michael Tobin with New York Life. And I think she's going to be on, but Taylor Walker with the American Council of Life Insurers. We are very excited about this conversation because long-term care isn't a private market problem. It's not a government problem. It's not an employer problem. It's a societal problem. And I think our issue, I should say. And I think that we're all here together talking about ways to collaborate and to make it affordable and accessible for all, I think is really important. So I have a series of questions that I am going to be asking my panelists For the first question, I'm also going to ask them to provide a few seconds of their background and experience. So our first question is, conversations about long-term care financing always seem to begin with the description of the challenges confronted by the private long-term care insurance market. But in the words of Mark Twain, my English major again, we feel that reports of the industry's death have been greatly exaggerated. Can each of you describe how you view the current private long-term care marketplace? And we'll start with Greg.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having me here. I'm Greg Gerlich with Northwestern Mutual. I've been with the company about 21 years. My history with long-term care insurance precedes that by about 11 years. So I started working with LTC back in the late 1980s and moved to Northwestern Mutual to continue working in long-term care. And currently, I'm responsible for pricing of our DI, LTC, and group products, and I have product compliance and have a lot of this kind of industry and government relations work. And I guess the first thing that I wanted to do is just get out on the table what Fred referenced earlier, that we have had some challenges in the industry, and a number of notable people have said something along the lines of, those who don't know history are destined to repeat it. And the good news is that we're very aware of our history, and particularly products issued many years ago with rich benefits have had significant rate increases, and even some of the more recently issued policies have had rate increases. I would like to think that the products that are being sold today have been priced with assumptions that better reflect that past experience and perhaps have more appropriate premiums. And there's been an SOA study done that did a stress test on the standalone LTC products, that indicated that the probability of having rate increases on current products is much less than recently priced products, is much less than on products that were priced and sold many years ago. And that only makes sense as we've better reflected the experience that has developed over the years. But certainly this rate increase history is one reason why the market has been struggling in recent years. And with that, I'll hand it off.
Yes. Oh.
Steve, you're next. You'd think I'd figure out the mute button after 2 years, but Steve.
Sure. So my name is Steve Spurka, and I've been with Thrivent Financial for the past 3 years. And the role I play there is I lead our health products, which is largely our long-term care business and our disability and some other products. But prior to that, I've probably, similar to Greg, probably a 20 plus year experience largely in the long-term care market. So I've been around this market. And if I were to describe the state of the market today, I would say it's largely one I see of innovation at Thrivent, and I think we all recognize from some of the opening comments of the issue of helping people plan for elder care is really important and critical for anyone's financial planning. And what I see in the industry is companies, one, learning from some of the mistakes of the past that Greg has commented, and trying to innovate with new products that can solve the need and kind of mitigate some of the challenges of the past. So just as one example, like our company, Thrivent, we're actively designing a life long-term care hybrid product to bring to market because we think it's a great growth opportunity, and we know there's consumer interest, but it also addresses a lot of the concerns, the challenges that you've seen with standalone products around rate increases and those challenges. Some of the newer innovation you're seeing is designed to eliminate that. The hybrid products have guaranteed premiums, but you're also seeing beyond just life long-term care hybrids. You're seeing annuity long-term care combinations. You're seeing short-term care. So it's kind of an exciting industry right now for us because you are seeing a lot of companies trying to innovate and figure out, hey, what are the right solutions that we can help consumers with to address this real challenging risk. So I'll kind of pause there and turn it over to our next panelist.
Thanks, Steve. Craig?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Craig Roars. I am the head of marketing for Newman Long-Term Care, a insurance brokerage headquartered in Richfield that offers solutions for most of the traditional and linked benefit insurers that we've talked about. I hold the certification in long-term care designation, have 24 years focused here on just long-term care planning, and I've been part of Minnesota's Own Your Future advisory panel since we started back in 2012. So thank you for letting me participate today. There's kind of 2 points I'd like to make. First is on premium affordability. That's always something that comes to mind when people are talking about long-term care. Many people think coverage is too expensive. And that often goes back to they may have been shown some options at some point that were designed to cover comprehensive care, absolutely every single penny of care that somebody might need. They were shown fully loaded policies that had all the bells and whistles. And the industry has really changed in the past few years to really focus on starter policies or more basic plans that are going to address the bulk of people's needs, but are going to be a lot more affordable. So you design plans now that don't take on all of the risk, but maybe co-insure the risk with the insurance company. You might say half is paid by the policyholder and half is paid by the insurance company. People are looking at different ways to tackle this instead of an all or nothing approach. But people keep looking at the industry as pricing wise, like you had gone at some point to a car lot and asked what a car cost, and they only told you the price of a fully loaded Cadillac Escalade. Meanwhile, there's tons of Kias and Camrys and other things that are going to get you from point A to point B. It just might not have the heated leather seats, right? So we have all these great solutions out there, but it requires a different approach. What we're actually seeing when we're looking at what we're selling right now is for people in their mid-50s, it's an average premium is about probably $1,800 a person. So that breaks down to about $150 a month. But we also work with a lot of middle income earners, a lot of teachers groups with Newman Long-Term Care. And with them, we design some really meaningful coverage that's probably more in the $800 a year or $80 a month ballpark. So it is really affordable when you put it in context of what people pay for other things like their cell phones. And even though we've all moved away from cable, we're probably paying just as much with all our different streaming services now. So when people understand that context, it's not that expensive. The second point I wanted to make is we are trying to look at every available insurance solution in the toolkit. Right now, Minnesota is actually missing a product that is most comparable to what they tried to do as a public program in Washington, and that is short-term care insurance that Steve mentioned just a bit ago. It's a similar type of insurance solution. Private insurance offers a year coverage, but it can also have some benefit options not available in a public type program. And it works great for people who are not maybe healthy enough for traditional long-term care coverage. And right now, Minnesota is one of only 8 states that do not offer short-term care options. And that's mainly because we don't have any legislation enabling it right now. So it's good to go to people with not just one solution, but all of these variety of products that Steve mentioned.
Great. Thanks, Craig. So the next question we have is that those in the public policy arena are well aware of the compelling case for long-term care insurance. We know that over 70% of the people turning 65 will need some type of long-term care. We know that pre-pandemic, 16 million people provided unpaid care for a family member with dementia. We know that the cost of care is rising. In Minnesota, the median annual cost of home care is $70,000, $51,000 for assisted living, and $132,000 for a semi-private room in a nursing home. So given the risks of self-financing and or relying on the state for long-term care and the evolution of the industry and products, why aren't more people buying long-term care? And we'll start with Craig.
Sure, thanks. I believe that overall there's a lack of awareness on the need to plan for care. A study that actually Thrivent did last year showed that 70% of the population do not have any type of documented extended care plan in place for themselves or their family member. And that's not even to talk about insurance. They don't have a plan. Where do you think you could receive care? Who would provide that care? How would it be funded? So insurance isn't the plan. A policy actually pays for the plan. And people aren't even doing that first part, creating the plan. What do you want to do? We also see long-term care is not comfortable to talk about. That same study showed more people were willing to talk about things like politics and religion that can be very divisive than talk about long-term care. It's not a fun topic. Nobody wants to picture themselves in a situation where they would rely on someone else for basic care needs, but it's a harsh reality that people need to start having these kind of conversations. They also could mistakenly believe that they are covered under other insurance or through some type of employer program. There's lots of opportunities to do more education from all sectors. A lot of people have mistaken beliefs that government programs will pay for long-term care, but most don't. One example is we work with a lot of military veterans who assume that their care is going to be provided maybe by the VA, and some might, but it's going to be usually very limited, and it depends on lots of factors like somebody's military service, active engagement, things like that. But there's lots of opportunities here for education and awareness, and I can let some of the others on the panel here talk about some of the other reasons that people don't buy.
Greg, you're up next.
Well, I think Craig covered a lot of them, but I think the lack of awareness is key here. I mean, they hear about other programs, whether it's Medicare, which really doesn't cover costs for long-term care services, or whether it's the medical assistance program in Minnesota. People hear about these programs, but they don't understand that you literally have to be impoverished to qualify for medical assistance. And in fact, most of the services that are provided now for long-term care, it's just a tremendous amount of unpaid care, primarily provided by family members. And that kind of care can take a great toll, not just on those needing care, but on the family members themselves. So I think a key here is making sure that people get a better understanding that, they need to take personal financial responsibility for their long-term care needs if they're able to. And these other programs that are available are primarily there if you're not able to take personal financial responsibility.
Steve, why aren't more people buying long-term care?
I'll just really echo kind of what we've already heard from Craig and Greg, but I'll just add a couple comments. I mean, it largely comes down to, in our experience at Thrivent, one, education and awareness. And education on understanding the real costs that are associated with it and why this is so important to have part of your plan. And also education on the options available to care. Some people are still associating this, if I need care, I have to go to a nursing home, I have to go here. Well, the modern policies have care across the home and facilities. So a large barrier we see is just the lack of education and awareness for folks. So I won't go on. I think Greg and Craig covered a lot of this.
Robin, may I offer something? This is Walter.
Sure.
Okay, my name is Walter Gray. I'm a financial advisor representing Ameriprise Financial. Been with On Your Future since the beginning with Craig. And I'm certified in long-term care as a designation. But my experience is that long-term care is misunderstood. And all of the other factors that have been discussed are absolutely true. But for most people, it's misunderstood and it's been bastardized because of it's too much money, in quotes. Many times today, in speaking to clients about long-term care, they just shut down, don't want to talk about it because it just costs too much. And they really don't understand what long-term care is, whether it's short-term, intermediate term, or long-term. They don't understand why they need it. They don't understand what costs could possibly be involved, and it costs too much. Thank you.
Thanks, Walter. You can be an official member of the Greek chorus then. Our next question is, given the underutilization of the private market and the overutilization of medical assistance as a default solution, how can the industry and the state partner to flip that script? And we'll start with Craig.
Well, I think first of all, we can just recognize, the public programs that currently exist. And we talked a little bit about medical assistance. We'd say that's a catastrophic program, right? People cover their own costs until their assets and income run out. And then the state and federal government combine to cover those additional costs. Although your provider options might be a little bit more limited. I think one thing that we don't talk about as much is that in many states, including Minnesota, we have what's called a Deficit Reduction Act, or DRA partnership. And this is an example of the government and industry working together to develop a program for the benefit of the public. And this is another catastrophic approach that leverages the Medicaid program that requires somebody to purchase a qualified LTC policy of some dollar amount. Say they purchase a policy that pays $150,000 in benefits. If they need long-term care services and go through that $150,000 policy, they only have to spend down to, they'll still have $150,000 in assets left, and then they can qualify for medical assistance at that point. So you can refer to that as like a dollar for dollar protection, asset protection, because people are allowed to retain the same amount of assets as were provided by the LTC policy and still qualify for medical assistance. Now, these partnership programs are doing their job. They're really providing a cushion to keep people from accessing the Medicaid program. And we don't really hear much about these programs now because they're pretty much standard. It's a standard policy that's sold in many states.
Thanks, Greg. Craig?
One thing I'd like to mention based on Greg discussing the partnership program. So a lot of people don't realize this. Minnesota ranks 10th in long-term care insurance ownership in the entire country, but we are actually 22nd when it comes to population. So we are just 2 spots behind Ohio in that ranking, which has almost double our population. And part of it, I believe, is due to our success with our partnership program here in Minnesota. We have some of the best language around qualifying for partnership policies. We changed our defining language around how to have a partnership policy back in 2015. And right now, 82% of the policies sold here are partnership qualified. If you compare that to states that haven't had a great partnership program, like like Indiana and Connecticut, they only have like 3.5% and 1% of their policies sold qualify for partnership. So we've led the country with what we've done. And so I think maintaining those kind of partnerships between private enterprise and government is key. The other thing that we've done really well here in Minnesota is we offer a tax credit for those who do proactively plan ahead and buy long-term care insurance. At Newman Long-Term Care, we did witness a sizable increase in consumer interest when we first introduced that credit here in Minnesota. And the way it works, for those unfamiliar, it provides to a policyholder the lesser of 25% of your premium or $100 a year. So for most people, it is $100 a year that you'd get as a tax credit. Our sister office in North Dakota, they actually saw similar growth when North Dakota introduced a $250 per person tax credit back in 2009. And so, in the past couple of years, Minnesota's talked about increasing that tax credit. Our neighbors in North Dakota have already had $250 a year for 13 years. So I look at it as almost you can have a carrot or a stick approach to planning. The stick approach might be that you have to have some kind of payroll tax or something if somebody doesn't plan on their own. The carrot approach is offering incentives or rewards to those who do take that personal responsibility or put this plan in place before something dire happens.
Thanks, Craig. Steve?
Yeah, I guess the what I would add to this is, the comments of there are some great examples of incentives and partnerships out there. And as we think about, hey, is there an opportunity for the industry and the state to work together on something? Like our first place to start would be on what can we do to partner to continue to create awareness of what is available and educate on the programs. I think there's examples that, hey, increasing awareness and helping and creating incentives can drive some of the behavior we'd like to see, which is people taking more responsibility for their future. So we would encourage, continued discussions about meaningful incentives, be it increasing the tax incentive or something like that. Right? We think those are great programs, and recognizing there's other insurances where the state steps in and mandates you actually have to own this coverage. We're not suggesting you go that far, but creating incentives we think is certainly an opportunity. And I guess second, we'd say to the extent that the state wants to do something more in terms of additional programs, et cetera, like our request would be, we would love to be at the table with you as you think about those designs. We think there's great opportunity, we think there's opportunity to do that, but I think it's important to have the private market part of that solution, so we make sure we're maximizing the impact of what could be done.
Thanks, Steve, and that is a perfect segue into our last question, almost as if we planned it. So our last question is, in 2019, Washington State enacted the first social long-term care insurance program called Washington Cares. It's funded by a payroll tax increase that would provide eligible beneficiaries with up to $36,500 in benefits per day for 1 year. Interestingly, hot off the presses, the governor of Washington State just signed a bill delaying the implementation of that program for 2 years because there are a number of kinks that need to be worked out. And I think part of our message here today is that, we think this is a great start because we're all at the table. And that was one of the problems we think with Washington State was everybody wasn't at the table when they put the plan together. So with that background, panelists, what are some of the lessons learned from the challenges faced by Washington State? And in addition to that, if Minnesota was to consider a similar program, what should be taken into consideration and what should that program look like? And we'll start with Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. And your comments, I think, really set up the maybe one of the more important points in this, and that is, as you look at the Washington program, and you give Washington State credit for trying to innovate, trying to push something new out there to address this, this really important challenge. I think one of the lessons learned in the challenges is that the program was not designed with enough input from key stakeholders, being, I would say industry being one of them, that I think if that would have been done, many of the pitfalls and challenges that have frankly caused the delay in implementation could have been avoided, and perhaps with that, sitting down with the stakeholders, perhaps a more viable program could have been implemented. So again, what I would say is I appreciate being included in this discussion, so that if we are, if that is the direction we're going, I think this partnership could be is going to be really important to avoid some of the challenges that Washington has seen. And I think there's a lot to be said about the pitfalls of Washington. And the one thing that is interesting is they created some pretty significant incentives for people to take private action in terms of buying long-term care, and people did. So there's something to be said about, be it incentives or carrot or stick or something like that. Like there's something that those types of things can actually create action. So we should think about that if there is if we are designing something in conjunction.
Greg?
Well, I guess I would say that we've talked about medical assistance and the DRA partnerships. Those are kind of catastrophic or back-end programs because the resident is really going to cover some of those upfront costs first. But something like Washington Cares is a a front-end program because it pays for that first $100 a day for the first year, and then the participant is responsible for the costs thereafter. So, I think the first thing that Minnesota and other states need to do is, kind of articulate what you're trying to accomplish with the program. And I guess I would say, if you're trying to provide some minimum benefit to a lot of people up front, that takes care of a lot of the short claims, while recognizing that many people will still struggle with costs of longer term services and have to leverage a medical assistance program at some point, that might imply more of a front end program like Washington has. I think if you're trying to encourage people to take personal financial responsibility for their long-term care needs, or at least some portion of their long-term care needs, I think that's, going to lead you toward more of a back-end program, right? So the Medicaid costs might be impacted because bottom line, whether somebody has coverage through a public program or a private program, in the long run, that's going to save Medicaid costs. So start by thinking about what you're trying to accomplish with the program. And then I guess the next thing I would say is the financing. And you've probably all given this a lot of thought already, but how much can the state invest in the program, and where can it get its biggest bang for the buck? And are you willing to invest money now, because you're anticipating even larger savings from medical assistance programs, but that savings is going to occur in the long run. So you won't get an immediate payback. It's a long-term payback. And whatever direction the state goes, it's just imperative that people know what coverage they have with the state program or what coverage they don't have. Because we are concerned that in some states, especially with like a front end program, people might think, wow, I'm covered for long-term care now because the state has a program. Well, that's a long ways from the truth. They've increased awareness a lot, so people are thinking about it, but that program will just provide like the first layer of coverage. So education is going to be key when any program is put in place.
Thanks, Greg. Craig?
Yeah, I would have to also go with some of what Greg just said. Some of it is education around what people do have. There's to me what I love that people are experimenting in this space, and this is a grand experiment that Washington is doing right now. But there are a couple of key things that they could have done much better. That really being around communication around the whole program. It was not communicated well to taxpayers, the people that are actually paying into this. Most of them learned about this through blogs, newspapers, talk radio, and so they were frantic when they were looking. So the message wasn't owned well, and it wasn't communicated well. So a lot of people looked at coverage as not as a long-term care planning strategy. It was more a tax avoidance strategy. And that's not the proper approach to take when you're looking to, plan for long-term care. But the other big missteps to me were communication, both from the program on down, talking to employers on how they would, communicate this to their employees. It was all crammed through such a short period that it was not properly done. So a lot of these people are going to be paying this payroll tax. They aren't really going to know what they're paying for. They're going to have assumptions of what they actually do have. If they paid into something for 30 years and it wasn't properly explained that, yes, you're going to have $100 a day for 1 year, it's going to be like a lot of other things that you see on your payroll tax, or, a big chunk, but you don't know what it's going. I have FICA on every payroll check, and I could not tell you what that pays for. I don't like paying it, but it's there. But see, they need to understand what they're actually getting for their money, and that was not properly done, and I don't know that it's going to be done. So to me, those are some missteps. There's also some things I would love if Minnesota does go this route to really put some thought into, like would the program provide for those with stay-at-home spouses because they're not on a payroll? What about people who are self-employed because they may not have the 401ks or pensions or some of those other retirement plans that anyone else could tap into? So those are some other concerns that should be looked at. What I always look at, government's not bad, insurance isn't bad, but I always look at insurance this way. Insurance is a legally binding contract. So if we can be part of the solution, it's good to have us there. As long as premiums are paid, the insurance companies, they can't change the rules. At the same time, we've seen government programs over time change to, maintain, solvency, so they could change benefits that are paid. They could change the amount of the tax. Those are things people should know going in and be prepared for. Where with insurance, like I said, it's legally binding. We can't change the rules. Steve at Thrivent can't change the rules around those policies once somebody signed it. As long as they paid those premiums, that is a contract. So if we're going to do something, it should be more like a contract with the people. It's making a promise and not changing the rules as we go along.
Now I want to call on Corey Anderson, who has a wealth of experience working with consumers in Washington State who are trying to get coverage, and we're struggling to figure out what to do with the program. Corey?
It was a joyous experience dealing with Washington at the very end. Craig's laughing because we had many conversations about it. But anyways, a few things that I kind of noted, and based on what some of the other people had commented on.
Corey, can I interrupt for 1 second? Before you talk, can you kind of talk about the opt-out process and what the rules were so people have a better context for your comments?
Yep. So we were working with clients in the state of Washington. I work in 40 plus different states around the country. And what was happening was there was a deadline in Washington where you had to have a policy supposedly in place by November 1st of this past year to avoid a new state long-term care premium tax that was going to start on January 1st. That was the original rule. There was some vagueness. Different people interpreted that rule differently. What does in place by November 1st mean? Does that mean you have a policy that's already in your hand that you've already accepted? Does that mean the policy date says prior to November 1st, but you signed it on December 15th? Does that mean your application was in before that? There were so many kind of moving parts that people didn't know. But the real thing is people were purchasing long-term care insurance as part of a tax avoidance because they were going to be charged 0.58% tax on every dollar of W-2 wages. The problem with that tax is there was no known what was going to happen to that tax. That tax could go up over time. It would have to reset every few years, but there was some vagueness of that tax. What I think happened is people started yelling fire in a crowded movie theater, and there was two exits, and the two exits were run through the tax door or run through the tax avoidance door and get your long-term care insurance. And it was lack of planning, lack of communication, and lack of all the players involved coming together. I think government and the insurance carriers, the brokers, the consultants, all the people needed to come together and work together. I think it was neat that Washington put themselves out there and tried something to deal with something that we've all known is the elephant in the room. We can't keep continuing to pay for everybody's care as a government. We just can't. We can't afford it. So let's do something about it. And it was time for somebody to do something about it, and Washington stepped up and tried to do it. But the lack of planning and the lack of communication was the biggest problem with it. And you had a lot of people that had a sour taste in their mouth after the whole process because it frankly put everybody in a bad position. I felt bad. There were some clients we couldn't get done right at the end. But yet they had tried to do it for a while in advance, and it was putting way too much pressure, I think, on the industry last second, and it was not properly communicated as a group. If this is something that Minnesota went down this road, this is like a few-year process. Also, it needs to have opt-out periods down the road. Like, why should my 15-year-old never be able to opt out of this new tax versus purchasing their own individual plan? In Washington, if I had a 15-year-old, they were never going to be able to opt out of the tax. They weren't going to be able to go get their own private long-term care policy instead. So I think it was lack of communication, kind of thinking about some different options for the different stuff. Robin, did I address everything you wanted me to address, or was there something else you wanted me to address?
How about 2 seconds on portability?
Oh, portability. That was one of the biggest problems with the Washington plan was you pay into this tax all these years, 20, 30, 40 years in, and then you move to maybe a little bit of a warmer climate, maybe a little less rain, something like that. And you move down south, and all of a sudden you have no long-term care plan anymore. You paid in the tax for 20, 30, 40 years, and there was no portability to it. Whereas if you would have had a private plan, that plan would follow you wherever you went.
Perfect, thank you. And lastly, I would add, I think one of the other problems that Washington State ran into was not coordinating with the industry so that the industry could create products that wrap around what the state was offering. I mean, it's clear that the state can't do it alone. And as I said, we can't do it alone. So the state needs to create, if they're going to go this route, you need to create a product that private industry can wrap around. And if the state wants to provide catastrophic coverage, then the industry has to be able to provide coverage on the front end or vice versa, which means they have to have things like the same ADLs, the same coverage triggers. I mean, the products need to fit together. So it's truly a partnership and we're truly spreading the risk. So that was one other issue with Washington State that I wanted to cover. Does anyone else have anything to add that we didn't? Corey.
One other thing, and maybe this is a way outside the box approach, but for the people that maybe they couldn't have gotten a private insurance policy, maybe there was a way to team up with the government in that scenario and still have a bucket of money, but instead of that bucket of money being at some new department at the government, instead having the private insurance market behind the scenes and some sort of teaming up. I don't know how that'd work. That's way above my pay scale. Greg would probably be the expert when it comes to that and figuring out the actuarial math, but something like that where maybe you can team up with the industry as well. So they have that bucket and then you have somebody who can administer that claim and not have to go create a whole new claims department, create a whole new finance department, create all these new different departments at the government when most of these insurance carriers already have these in place.
Thanks, Corey. That was not too out of the box. So you're good. Does anyone else have any? We have, I think we have a few minutes left. If anyone has any, am I roaming too far, John or Dan? If anyone has
Robin,
any questions.
I was just, this is Greg again, and I was just going to say that, I know we have an actuarial session coming up here after this. We're going to talk a little bit about the finances and sustainability, but I think you should know from the industry side too, it's very important to us that if you want to put a program together that it's designed to be sustainable over the long run, and I think there's some points to that. First of all, you need to be realistic about how much you'll need to collect. Whether you're doing it through a payroll tax or general revenues, you have to know the costs. And I get the impression that, sometimes you'll ask for actuarial input and they'll give you input and then the program will morph after the estimates are made. And you have to wonder sometimes if the actuarial consultants have had an opportunity to revise their estimates. And I guess we talked a little bit about the exemptions, but I think, if you're going to have exemptions, it is very important to be thoughtful about how those exemptions are determined and administered. They should only apply as long as people meet the criteria for exemption. This kind of one lifetime exemption approach creates a lot of challenges for everybody. And it also it creates challenges with the pricing assumptions for the program. I think another aspect might be that you'd like to have contributions to be reasonable, have some reasonable relationship to the benefits that are available to people under the program. I think we had a lot of people kind of fleeing the program in Washington because the tax added up to an extraordinary dollar amount that they could go to the private market and purchase much more coverage than they could get through the Washington program for the same dollars. So if you're going to have some kind of contribution like that through payroll tax, you might want to even consider capping the payroll that is really going to be taxed in order to keep those relationships a little bit more in line. And then finally, I guess I would say, just look for opportunities to reduce incentives to use benefits. Because if people have incentives to use benefits, that just increases program costs, both on the public and the private side. And it's going to have fewer dollars available for, the people who truly need them. And I think when I say incentives to benefits, that could include something like duplication of benefits. Right now, if people have private coverage and then you add a public program, well, if they can get benefits from both of those for the same services, suddenly they have an opportunity to have an income, and we want to avoid that at all costs. And I would just say, allow the same maybe non-duplication provisions. If you go into the qualified LTC tax laws, companies are not even allowed to duplicate the benefits of Medicare, the Medicare program, or something like that. And I guess I will just leave it at that.
Robin, can I chime back in?
Yes.
One thing I would make sure I'm crystal clear on with what Greg mentioned was the one-time opt-out, and that what he was pointing towards is the biggest fear in the industry was people are going to buy the policy, cancel a policy, opt out of the tax, and never have the policy nor pay the tax. And so something to make sure that those policies are still in force 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. I think that's what Greg was getting towards there.
Yep.
Correct. Okay. Thank you guys again for listening. And I'll turn it back to Fred and Dan.
Okay. I do have a couple of questions just to hopefully clarify a couple of issues. One is at the beginning, you were talking about the range of products that are out there. There are standalone products, hybrid combination products, starter products. And then there was discussion on the partnership program and the tax credits. So this might be I guess a question for any one of you who knows the answer, but can you explain for what types of products the partnership status and the tax credits apply?
Fred, do you want to?
Yeah, the partnership program is just geared towards the traditional long-term care, and that's because it's federal legislation would have to be changed to enable it for any of those linked benefit, chronic illness, LTC on long-term care chassis, things like that. It also doesn't apply for short-term care. And then the tax credit, my understanding is whatever is defined as long-term care insurance by Minnesota statute, and the policy has a minimum benefit of $100,000, I believe, is what the requirement is.
Okay, thank you. And
there's also, you got Chris's question, Schneeman's?
I do have a question, Dan, that I'd love to ask the panel. I actually have two. The first one is for Craig. Craig, you mentioned this idea that the insurance policy is different from public policy because the insurance policy is legal and can't change. But I think one of the things that, and it is unfortunate, but it is the case, is that there have been a lot of price increases, dramatic price increases on the insurance side, which is a big change. And so in effect, because I know there are two different kinds of policies and whatnot, but maybe the panel can speak a little bit to that idea, because I think that is a real issue in terms of consumers. So that's my first one, and I have one other one. So go ahead, Craig, and whoever else wants to speak to it.
I can start on that one, John. This is Steve. So, if you look at the market right now, and we're looking to, consider your options. What I think is available to consumers today is, I could buy a standalone product that is likely a little lower cost than maybe a hybrid. But I trade off, I don't get a guaranteed premium, right? So that's there. But if you want a product that, hey, I want to be guaranteed that my premiums won't change, there are products available in the market, primarily the life long-term care hybrids that do guarantee, that will give the consumer that benefit, that their premium is guaranteed, and they're either going to get a death benefit or a long-term care benefit out of the policy. So, today's through the innovation, like you're seeing different kind of value props evolves for consumers that are concerned about that risk.
And I guess I would say, and this is Greg, and I guess I would say, the risk is the same, for private and public in terms of the rates, right? I mean, we don't provide guaranteed rates on standalone policies, but if there's a public program, the contributions can change under a public program too. I think Craig was kind of focusing on the contract itself. You buy a $100 a day policy for 3 years, those are the benefits you're going to get, and the benefit criteria will be what you bought at that point in time. I think a public program, like a lot of retirement programs we've seen over the years, can kind of morph. So there is some additional risk with a public program.
Yes, that's exactly what I meant, Greg.
Okay, well, I think that helps clarify things a little bit. My other question involves demographics, and by the way, I think when Fred gets to talk about some of the things with the actuaries on the panel, some good discussion about that last issue is warranted, and so I know that Fred's planning to talk to some of that stuff. Regarding the demographics, can each of you maybe speak a little bit to who you think the typical buyer that for your insurance is? And the reason I say that is because, and that idea that you just discussed, the idea of a guaranteed premium, is a great one. But would that be available to somebody who had an income of $50 or $60 or $70,000 or $80,000 a year? Those are reasonable income levels, but but really, unfortunately, for a lot of folks who are in middle income, those types of policies are kind of out of the ballpark. So can some folks speak to that? Thanks.
I guess I can. I'll start it off and just say, maybe our typical purchaser is a little bit different than the industry overall. Probably, we work with a career distribution channel. We have people who've developed relationships over the course of years. I think our average issue ages have always been relatively low compared to the industry, although they've been coming down. We've always been in the low to mid 50s for an average age, probably a little bit more on the relatively affluent side. So like you're saying, John, we're not necessarily as successful in that mid market as we would like to be. In terms of what kind of coverage is available for those people, we have always provided a relatively broad range of coverages. So even though our typical policy might be in the neighborhood of $180 per day now, certainly somebody of more modest means would be able to purchase something smaller, $80 to $100, and maybe for 2 or 3 years instead of 5 or 6. That might be a typical purchaser. So there might be lower cost options available to them. Obviously, the challenge there is that they don't have the same level of coverage, and we might be only covering 50% of their cost, where we're covering 70 or 80% of the cost for a more affluent purchaser.
And to that point that you just made, Greg, we're in Minnesota, and if you live in Minnesota and you get a 50% off coupon for anything, you're going to use it. And essentially, that's what a policy that would pay half of your premium would be a 50% discount on your long-term care coverage every single day. So it's just reframing how people look at some of these products and solutions.
May I add to that, Robin? This is Walter again.
Of course, Walter.
Okay, thank you. This is only out of my personal practice. What I've been experiencing is, well, for the 35 years I've been selling long-term care insurance, is most of the people that were buying it were 50 55, 60. Even now, I'm talking to younger people about it, but they're not quite interested because they don't think they're old enough. And maybe 20 years from now, they won't think they're old enough. But the people that are buying long-term care coverage from me right now, they're buying short-term care, in-home. It's very low cost, relatively speaking, and limits them to certain things that they wouldn't get in a full long-term care policy. So that's my own personal experience, and it's all based on money. How much does it cost? Thank you.
There's a question from Chris Schneeman that he posted in the chat a little while ago that I don't think we've talked about much, which is really employer-sponsored and group coverage.
So one thought I had on a good partnership between employers, government, and the state could result in a revitalized group long-term care market. Because if employers are out there educating their workforce on the need, and hey, there's this government program, there's also this program that we've vetted for you and gotten maybe some underwriting or premium concessions on, it could bring a lot more viability back to that market. We did see in Washington, one of the carriers that still does offer true group, their sales exploded. Transamerica had a ton of business, and because they had group plans with some of the big employers like Boeing and Google and Microsoft. And we also had a lot of people reaching out from those three companies to Newman Long-Term Care in Minnesota to find out what solutions we had for them. So, I mean, people were looking even if they had a group plan, but I could see this potentially a really good, strong partnership revitalizing group long-term care sales.
John, to answer your question on the age too, the age has, I think, been coming down with the Washington plan. We had all age groups. Unfortunately, there was some last minute changes and we couldn't get the younger crowd in. We had people 22, 23 years old that wanted certain policies, but we had a shrinking of what was available at the last minute. But I've seen with our practice more and more people at the younger ages purchasing long-term care. And it's back to what Craig was talking about. I think of the nationwide famous good old Deb Newman, and she always talked about the coupon. You either have a coupon for Macy's or a coupon for Kohl's Cash, and you're absolutely going to use that coupon. And she said, why not use a 50% off or 75% off coupon or whatever? So you don't always have to buy the Cadillac, buy a good Ford or Chevy.
And I noticed that Chris put another comment out there, just saying if we could make more inroads with the group market, it would help drive down the cost. And absolutely right. I mean, the sooner that people purchase coverage, the more affordable it is going to be.
Okay, I think we're right on time, within 3 minutes, so we can move on to the next agenda item, which is the actuarial discussion. And I'll invite, I'm on the panel, but the other two people are going to go first. So let's start with Clark, and if you could introduce yourself and then just go into your presentation, that would be great.
Sure. Clark Heitkamp, and I've been an actuary with long-term care over 20 years. And I've been currently with my current firm, UHAS, which is a division of risk strategies, and been doing consulting actuarial work for them for 15 years. And I've done some work for Minnesota regarding the life stage product. I was going to share a screen, but it kind of disappeared. There we go. Hopefully you can see this. Chris Giese and I both had the opportunity to be members of the American Academy of Actuaries Long-Term Care Criteria Work Group that developed 7 essential criteria for the long-term care financing reform proposals. These criteria can be or should be considered in formulating and evaluating reform proposals. And really, the previous panel hit on a good share of these. And so you might see some repetition on some of that, but this just somewhat formalizes the the topics that were kind of touched on previously. So these 7 items were documented in an issue brief and published by the Academy. I thought it'd be helpful to at least list these criteria and briefly discuss them, and as the state of Minnesota considers developing such a program. I'm not going to read through all this, but I will add a few comments to each. Essentially, these 7 items are to be considered when developing a long-term care reform program. The first one, level of coverage, is focused on who is covered, including demographic characteristics, including age, gender, and marital status. In addition to their health status and wealth and income characteristics. The most influential feature driving the number and attributes of people covered under any kind of proposed long-term care program is whether it is mandatory or voluntary. That's a kind of a big criteria, and the Washington plan was mandatory with the opt-out feature. The second one is comprehensiveness of benefits, includes the location of care, eligibility of care, limits on total coverage, and limits on level of care. This comprehensiveness also includes whether a plan has full coverage, catastrophic coverage, or limited initial coverage. And as Greg mentioned, front-end coverage was kind of the Washington program, which is limited initial coverage. The third one, quality of care benchmarking and monitoring, is whether the care that will be offered is not just available, but is also good care. Items here include whether or not the supply of providers will be available, and if the funding is eventually made available, and then the quality of these providers. So it's important not only to think about who is covered, but who's going to provide that coverage. The fourth one is the understandability and choice, which recognizes the diversity of needs of individuals and families, and whether a proposed plan will be flexible to meet these needs or a more of a simple type plan that cover the basic needs. The fifth one, affordability, which is always important, not only includes the initial affordability, but as the possible cost changes over time and whether or not the plan maintains affordability in the long term. Sixth one is the risk management and cost control. Without managing the risk and including cost, some kind of type of cost controls, the proposed reform plan would not maintain affordability. In addition, as a program is evaluated over time, it will be affected by more factors than just the users of the program. It will also be affected by the changing economy, political environment, and demographics of those covered by and contributing to the program. Finally, the seventh one is the financial soundness and sustainability. This includes consumers' confidence of the program and appropriateness and the appropriate use of the funds invested. More specifically to the purpose of this conference, this includes whether the designers ensure that the program interacts well with the existing private insurance carriers. I guess, Fred, with that, maybe we're going to turn over to Chris to let him talk about the Washington program.
Sure, that sounds good. And then after the three of us chat, there'll be opportunity for questions and comments.
Sounds good. Thanks, Clark and Fred. So Chris Giese, principal and consulting actuary with Milliman. I've been working in the industry for over 20 years. More recently, I would say within the last 10 years, have had a lot of focus, both on the private side, but also have had the opportunity to work on a lot of these reform alternatives as well. For full disclosure, so I've been kind of the lead actuary working with the state of Washington since 2015 and actively are still helping them. So I'm sure people are eager and interested to hear more about Washington. So happy to share details when I can. So just kind of some opening remarks that kind of Fred was saying that we'd start with. Just wanted to touch on a few things. One, and I think maybe it was Greg who kind of teed this up. I think it really is important as you think about these programs to define the objective first. Oftentimes I feel like we skip ahead to the details of what the plan design looks like without really thinking about what the overall objectives of the program are. And thinking about what that objective looks like, could vary, across different groups. Perhaps the The goals of the program might look different depending on an individual's income level. So for example, should individuals who are higher income pay on average more out of pocket? Should there be more subsidies for low income individuals? And if there are subsidies or kind of cross subsidies across different groups, how is that accomplished? Do you charge a more progressive premium tax as an example? Or do you structure the benefits differently depending on income level? So there's a lot of different ways. And again, a lot of it comes back to the overall objectives of the program. The other one I think was touched on a little bit is, thinking about, different cohorts or ages of individuals. We talked a lot and heard about, Dan teed this up around, the baby boom generation. We know our country is getting older. Are there solutions geared toward that group of individuals, or are we really talking about individuals who are going to need care 20 or 30 years down the road? And are there any type of intergenerational equity issues that need to be considered as you design a program? The other thing that I think that's really important is really to consider these programs through the lens of all of the different stakeholders. So the government programs, the private market, consumers, and I think providers as well. I think we have to make sure that we are aware of providers and their ability to deliver the care. And maybe I'll just relate that to a couple things that were brought up about Washington, just to give a little bit of perspective to kind of tease that up. One was the discussion around the opt-out. Interestingly, the way the opt-out was originally thought about in Washington, it was going to be just a grandfathered option. So there wasn't going to be any kind of prospective period where individuals could go out and buy insurance to opt out of the program. The original intention was to just grandfather people in who had already bought coverage before when the act was passed. One of the challenge when you have things like opt-out or voluntary nature, it really creates a lot of actuarial uncertainty and stress on the financial soundness of a social insurance program. We can probably all remember the Class Act, which was designed to be a voluntary program, but also guaranteed issue. And those words going together for an actuary just do not fit. You'll start to hear words like adverse selection and death spiral. So you got to be really careful in terms of how you structure any opt-outs to, again, think about the financial soundness of a program that you're designing. The other interesting one, I was talking about the benefit trigger again, and I definitely echo the sentiment of, setting that up in a way that allows the private market, say, to overlap or wrap coverage around. As Washington was thinking about that benefit trigger, they also were trying to consider how the WA Cares Fund would overlap with their Medicaid program. So the benefit trigger definition that's under their Medicaid program, how does that overlap with WA Cares Fund? So again, there's a lot of moving pieces and considerations. And again, maybe the last thing I just want to reiterate or echo is, when you design programs like this, really try to think through it from the lens of all the stakeholders. So with that, I think I'll stop and turn it back over to you, Fred.
Okay, thanks a lot, Clark and Chris. And when it comes to time later in our conference, I definitely have some questions resulting from what you brought up. But I'll go through a few points now. So my perspective is as a regulator and an actuary. And so we oversee the claims paying ability of insurance companies and the rates of insurance companies. We play, a pretty big role here. And as has been mentioned, we have seen instability in aspects of the private long-term care insurance market. The costs of long-term care insurance have been much higher than contemplated when many of the policies were sold in the 1990s. So over 20 years ago, we're still feeling the impacts of policies sold over 20 years ago. And this has resulted in rate increases for many policyholders. In many cases, policyholders' rates have doubled or tripled compared to the rates they were paying when they bought the policies. In many cases, the policyholder has had an expectation that their rate would never change. And so obviously people were unhappy about getting the rate increases, and I'm scheduled to speak with a couple of the upset policyholders on Monday who are concerned about the rates and continued uncertainty about, we're getting this rate increase. What can we expect in the future? The reality is that there have been 2 long-term care insurance companies in other states that have gone insolvent in recent years. And there is a threat that, we may see more of that in the future. So that just increases the uncertainty of what's going on. So what's happening in insurance is, as has been mentioned, not just an insurance issue. It's a reflection of what's really going on with long-term care in general. So even when people have good intentions, act on those intentions and plan for it, the actual cost of long-term care it tends to be more expensive than what people plan for. And one of the reasons is that people are getting older, and as people get older, there's a higher chance that people are going to have severe cognitive issues. Whereas when life expectancy was younger, people were dying for other reasons that weren't as tragic and drawn out. And so the issues we've seen increasingly cause these cost increases are going to continue to be the case as baby boomers transition from those who are providing care to those who will need care. On the insurance side, however, many of the problems are due to products issued 10 or more years ago. It's been mentioned that over the last 10 years, especially, the products have changed. There's less risk for the insurance company in many cases. And, so we don't expect to see the newer products cause the same concerns as those sold, 15 to 20 years ago. The products today tend to lower the insurer's risk. So exactly what I just said. So the innovations have helped out. Some are tailored to a wealthier crowd. A lot of the current combination products where you can buy a life insurance or an annuity and then fund long-term care out of that, they tend to be tailored to a wealthier crowd where a bunch of cash develops in the policy, and then that cash is available to fund long-term care needs. So now we're going to talk about some newer types of products, and these have been ones that have been talked about at Own Your Future for many years, and we may be on the verge of exciting activity there that could help out middle-income people, mainly by encouraging them to plan and budget for their long-term care needs at an earlier age. So there's a product concept that you've likely heard about called Life Stage. It's a product that, instead of being the more expensive type of life insurance that has cash values and is intended to last through your life, it really latches onto term life insurance, which is a much cheaper version of life insurance. And the way Life Stage would work is that, say you're 35 years old, you just bought a house, or you just had your first child, you have a need for life insurance over the next 20 years. And you would ordinarily buy 20-year term life insurance, which is fairly cheap. The Life Stage product would add a few dollars onto that policy. So not only would you be planning, for, the tragedy of a death between when you're 35 and 55, but you'd also have available kind of pre-funding for long-term care needs down the road. And I think John O'Leary, one of the hosts of this meeting, he's done a lot of market research and found that there would be favorable reception to a product like that, where people kind of understand they'll have a need in the future, don't want to spend that much on it, but perhaps, spend $50 a month on it, knowing that you're going to be covered in the older years. If there are any questions on, I know there's a plan support, kind of carried by our department, the Department of Commerce in Minnesota, to kind of carry a bill during this upcoming legislative session. If there are any questions on that, our government affairs person in charge of leading those efforts, her name is Helen, and any questions about the progress in that area can be directed to her. And I believe she will she's online, she'll post her contact information. Otherwise, you can reach out to me. So I've talked a lot about, you know, the pros and cons and the challenges and successes of the private insurance market for long-term care. And it's kept me up at night, you know, ever since I got to the Department of Commerce. We're seeing, you know, we've received over 200 rate increase requests in the past 5 years. And we're dealing with companies. Some companies are doing well. Some companies are struggling financially due to their long-term care blocks. But with all those issues that are, like, you know, complicating my life, what concerns me more are the people who do not have private long-term care insurance coverage. So these are people who are just kind of exposed out there, where all of a sudden they could have some event happen to a parent or to themselves, a spouse, that could result in several hundreds of thousands of dollars of exposure, and they have no plan for it. So I appreciate that, you know, at Commerce, we're focusing a lot on the private insurance issues. We're working with Robin and her team to work through those. But I'm glad in Minnesota, we're thinking about the bigger picture about those who do not have private insurance coverage. How can we encourage them to gain coverage, or how can we create a program to kind of help them out? This is an enormous issue. I don't know how many people are in this meeting. It's around 40 or so. I bet you a vast majority of us have personally dealt with long-term care situations, whether it's grandparents, parents, aunts and uncles, friends, spouses, you know, themselves in some cases. I mean, this is a major issue. And with the baby boomers aging, it's going to become, you know, a big focal point in most of our lives, is having to deal with these issues. And you know, the type of care and funding the care is going to become a bigger and bigger burden on most of our lives. We're going to think more about how to balance work and caring for our parents and grandparents. And so I just see it as being an enormous issue. And for those reasons, I think it seems appropriate for leaders at the federal and state level to have these discussions to determine what type of plan could help people, the elders and the kids of the elders who will have these needs. So I'll stop there. And before I get to my questions for the other panelists, I want to see if anyone in the audience has questions for our group.
Well, I will ask a question if we're waiting on the audience members to come up with one. As you guys think about the group coverage market versus the individual, and LifeStage is really, I think, an individual sort of policy reform, what are the missing gaps in the group market, or what are the things that states should be thinking about doing to facilitate group coverage expansion?
I'll start very briefly by mentioning that I see LifeStage as serving both markets, individual and group. But it looks like Clark is about to give an answer.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And we really were talking about individual, but also a lot of discussion for LifeStage within the group, and actually selling with group life. So I think within the state of Minnesota, you have a group life option, and you could wrap around that or add to your selection a LifeStage option that really would focus on group, and it's easier to purchase a small amount of benefit. And but I think John probably has an opinion on that as well. John O'Leary?
Yeah, I actually think that the primary target for LifeStage actually is group. I grew up in the group side of the business, and my feeling is that it makes a kind of a more simple, more easy way for groups to go at it. So I really think that, and whether it's LifeStage or other options like that, I really think that, and I know there are challenges on the group side. There are big challenges on the group side, both distribution challenges and also some real questions about employer support and ERISA kinds of issues that might need to be dealt with there. But fact is, that's a great place for people to be able to buy their insurance. So, and when we did our research, we looked at that, and I do think a lot of people were saying, both in focus group research and the quantitative research we did, that they like the idea of being able to buy it through their employers. So I think the consumers really are interested in that too. So
I'll just add maybe one other subtle comment. So I think when you think about the group market too, it's important to keep in mind, through the lens of like the HR leaders at employers, and what was on their plate 2 years ago versus what might be on their plate 2 years from now, I think is really relevant. Even if it's 100% employee paid, whenever you introduce a new product, it ultimately, the HR teams and employers, really bear a lot of the effort. So, maybe the last few years, the climate, has looked different with obviously the ACA has created a lot of new challenges for large self-funded employers. So hopefully we're kind of trending toward an environment where, we can get back to from a more holistic view of employee benefits, and things like the life stage product can really, offer a way for a value add for an employer for their employees.
Okay, and I'll just go briefly into the chat. There are a couple of questions or maybe ideas. One is allow required true group life insurance in Minnesota to include a long-term care feature. So that would be a policy issue. And another is exempt policies with long-term care features from a premium tax. And one more, incentivize employers to offer group long-term care that cover all benefit eligible employees. Maybe offer a tax credit to the employer. So to policymakers out there, there are several ideas.
Looks like Representative Keel has a question for this panel.
Okay, great.
Unmute myself. Thank you very much. In all these conversations, my brain goes to my small Main Street, typically family businesses that need to do something to protect the family, maybe the aging person, or maybe even somebody with a disability that's going to need more help, and then also the business itself, so that you risk losing it all. And I know there's some real detail in that. It isn't that simple, but have we thought about how we do that? And full disclosure, I'm a farmer with the reason I even got interested in long-term care long before legislation is that my in-laws started to get sick, and we realized that we could lose quite a bit in that business. So we did some planning, but and that's a lot of conversation, but it is very expensive and costly. So, but I think about our Main Street businesses most of all that maybe want to move that business down, and of course there's differences. So, any suggestions?
I think that's definitely a consideration, is the protection of, not, I'm just trying to think of a way to say this, like a situation happens in your family that takes your time away or resources away from your day-to-day job. And then how do you address both the financial side and the amount of time it takes to address those issues? And I think, did I have that correct?
Well, the other issue would be is as you need that personal help, how would you do that purchase as a group to be able to protect that issue, because it's a smaller group. Is there some way we could do it like we do healthcare, where we have these smaller businesses that have an ability to buy in because they're not big enough to buy in individual, in group? And, are there some other ways of helping them to protect their industry? Or, small business. I'm thinking Main Street, really.
Yeah. And that's an interesting question. Because I know with health insurance, there can be a big difference between how much that insurance costs when you're purchasing as an individual versus through a group. My guess is that with long-term care, you'd likely get a pretty similar deal if you bought a long-term care policy individually versus a group. I think there was a comment before that the group insurance tended to be cheaper, but I think that's because the average like purchase age through a group is cheaper. And so if you were like a 40 or 45-year-old, you know, who purchased individual life and long-term care insurance, you know, you'd probably get a similar deal as somebody who bought it through a group. And I invite anybody, if I got that wrong, then please speak up.
Yeah, this is Clark, and I guess, you know, I agree, Fred. I think there's not a lot of true group options right now. And, you know, a situation currently, what you can, you know, look at the individual side is essentially what you would have to do. I'm sure a lot of the agents or carriers online could help with that. But as you look forward into, as Minnesota is designing this, and a potential plan is whether you include the option for small employers to opt in, if it's really focused on a group environment. So can small self-employed people opt in is one option. And then, or do you cover more people than just those that are employed with a W-2? So, I mean, that kind of looking more forward is how can it be designed to cover more people than just those currently working for in a group setting, larger group setting.
Yeah, I think some of it too comes back to what the last panel, I think, you know, one of their consensus was just education and awareness. Yeah, I've seen some studies done by the federal government that shows that even if you decrease the price, say, of a insurance policy by 25%, that still isn't enough to get people to want to buy something. And, you know, unsurprisingly, consumers want a whole lot of benefits and want to pay very little for it. So I think that education and awareness is really key. So people understand what, you know, the cost is for long-term care. It is really expensive when you need it. A lot of people are going to end up needing care at some point in their life. And so I think a lot of that, you know, comes back to, you know, convincing people that this is a significant cost and, you know, you should plan today versus waiting to plan until you're in, you know, your 50s or 60s.
Yeah. And just reading through some of the questions, including Dan's question, I think the issue, I mean, I probably technically, like a co-op or affinity organization could purchase group long-term care coverage. I think the real issue is, like, if you think of like normal health insurance, like probably 5 million people in Minnesota, you know, have health insurance each year, but you know, it might be 1 to 2% of that that's the scale of the number of people looking to buy long-term care insurance each year. And so my guess is that it's just a scaling issue. You wouldn't have enough people across all the groups to do that. But again, if somebody has alternative information, I'd welcome that.
So, Fred, this is Craig Roars again. In Minnesota, we do have some long-term care carriers that do offer association discounts or affinity group discounts, but they're not purchasing usually. They're not employer-paid programs. They're going to be, you know, paid by the employee. But we do have some of those kind of options. The one thing to keep in mind with any of those true group policies too is you're usually not getting the best health rating when you're in those kind of plans, because they're designing it so everybody has an opportunity for coverage. And so you, as you actuaries on the panel know, you're having to balance the healthy people with the really sickly sometimes people. And so sometimes the group plans are a good option for those who, you know, might not health qualify again for traditional long-term care.
Okay, that sounds great. And we're again right on time. I'm going to hand it back over to Dan, and we're going to start the agenda item on legislator comments.
Yeah, and I will just kind of facilitate as far as passing the virtual microphone around. I think Senator Abler just posted a thank you in the chat. He might have had another competing calendar event, but any other legislators that would like to make comments or ask additional questions, we reserve time for you to speak and recognize and respect your voice in this as well. Okay, I think it was a tie, but I'm going to let Representative Rasmussen go first because I saw two different people raise their hand.
Thanks, Dan. I would just say thanks for having this discussion today. I've learned a lot, definitely, from the conversation. And for me, I think for a lot of Minnesotans, we've created this very strong disincentive for saving for long-term care. I see this all the time with constituents where there's a lot of asset shifting. As people are potentially looking at a long-term care expense, whether that's a small business or a family farm. And, so I think there's definitely a big opportunity for us to look at how we can, avoid that type of behavior and create products that help people manage that risk. Because I do think, just given the fact, that public programs do kick in at a certain point, and the cost is very high, we're just creating some bad incentives for people. And I think they're just following those incentives. And so I think anything we can do to try to change that decision matrix that people are facing when they're looking at these substantial costs will have, not just a benefit to those individuals and the families, but also to the expense that the state ultimately ends up paying through MA for these types of projects. So I think this is a very important conversation for us to have.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that comment. Representative Keel, you have your hand up.
There we go. There. Yes, I would echo Representative Rasmussen's comments. Living in this environment in my district, a lot of people are looking to continue a business, and of course, but wanting to take care of family members, senior citizens. The health care, the long-term care, excuse me. Dan knows that I've been involved in that for quite some time personally. And I just see the real struggles, and people are trying to figure out, how can I invest in a way that I can care for myself and yet not lose the business at hand. I think we just need to find places for people to be responsive, because the system itself can't handle caring for everyone. And, we have problems from hiring enough people to get that help, whether you want to be private or in a nursing home or that situation. And we just need to have people help to be able to plan and make good incentives. I like the word incentives, to be able to plan for their own care instead of relying on, it might happen or whatever. I liken myself to gambling some days. Well, I'm going to put my money in certain pots to be able to protect whatever. And I'd really like to be somewhat able to care for family members or myself, and not risk my grandson's future. Thank you very much. This was a very important conversation.
Dan,
Fred, go ahead.
One thing I'd add is, I think especially, the more we can empower families to help also manage long-term care costs is going to be a really important piece of this solution, because oftentimes kind of the initial reaction is, okay, MA is kicking in, here's what those benefits allow. You have, a social worker who's helping with a placement versus, are there opportunities to keep that family member at home longer if they just had, certain limited supports. And I think, that's something that we can look for in these products too. And I appreciate that conversation that people had as well, saying, hey, this isn't a prescriptive, here's what you're going to do, but, giving some flexibility and helping, manage that cost, manage that risk with families. I actually think families on their own will be able to help figure out how to take cost out, while also actually providing probably, even better situations for their loved ones too.
To the point the representative just made, if there were more tax incentives or credits for family caregivers, because they're the ones who are taking the brunt of some of those costs at times. If there were ways to help provide them resources without them having to give up, their own retirements and job opportunities at work, that would be another way to tackle some of these issues without it being an insurance solution or a government program solution.
It's great, really helpful feedback. Chair Schultz, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank everyone for being here today, and this was very informative. Appreciate the perspectives of our providers. And I actually had the opportunity in December to meet with some representatives from Washington State, so I learned a great deal about some of the problems they were seeing in what they had passed, and knew that they had to make some revisions. One of them was portability, so if people want to move out of state. But so we can learn a lot from Washington State, what worked and what didn't work. And I appreciate hearing all the perspectives today. I'm really looking forward to working with everyone here and my Republican colleagues to pass some meaningful legislation to make it easier and more affordable to get long-term care coverage, and also to reduce the reliance on Medicaid for long-term care services by keeping people in their homes longer. So really looking to team up and have some solutions and create legislation that can improve on what Washington State did, but also really work for the people of Minnesota. And I'm glad that everyone in Minnesota is already at the table and has already been talking about this for many, many years. So that makes it so much easier. But please send me your ideas so we can work on legislation. And I already have a couple that I want to work on, even though it's a short session and it's really technically a policy year, because we have the surplus. Anything's possible. So I really appreciate everyone here, especially our folks at state agencies who have been so overwhelmed with the pandemic. It's probably hard to do all of this additional work on top of everything they're doing just to address the emergency situations we've had in the last 2 years. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for being here, Chair Schultz. And since I know you're in academia, I was going to make a metaphor that I think we're looking at a bell curve. There are wealthy households on the one end that are never going to need Medicaid. We never really need to even worry about them. They're going to be able to afford whatever care they need, but they're a small number. And then there's small number low-income households, and certainly we have all the data that you could ever want about who's on Medicaid. But we're basically knowing that we're going to take care of them already. But you've got that huge population bubble of aging older adults in Minnesota in the big bell curve in the middle with some assets, and it's whatever those assets are, whether it's a small business, a farm, just things that they wanted to keep that we've really got to think about. So I know that's center in your mind as well.
Yeah, one thing I'll mention is I know it's not the focus of today's conference, but I've heard a lot of people talking about, how helpful it is for people to stay at home if they choose to. And I've been amazed and I've attended a lot of, last couple of years virtual conferences and stuff like that. It's amazing how much money and effort is being put into and creative thought is being put into those types of things. There's a ton of tech activity that's just really, really exciting. And, it's probably going to, materially change things over the next 10 years about how people stay at home. So maybe a future, if people are always excited about tech stuff, but maybe that could be a topic of a future conference like this. I talked about my role, and it's rates are going up and companies are struggling and stuff like that. So I try to gravitate toward that just to not get too depressed about all the long-term care issues. And just long-term care is depressing in general. It's people aging and not being able to, do what they used to do is sad. But if people want to get excited about something, the amount of really smart people thinking about how to keep people in their homes is one of those areas.
Just responding to kind of what Representative Rasmussen was saying, I think we've got to think differently about how we support the caregivers. The way we do it now with Medicaid, you have to go through the whole process of Medicaid enrollment and spend down. And then at the very end, when you've qualified for everything, but you've basically burned through your assets, we say, oh, by the way, is there somebody in your household you'd rather pay to do the care, consumer directed? Great. Now you can do that. Well, you've already gone through the whole process of getting into Medicaid. What, can we figure out something that's really on the front end of that is more caregiver support on the front end? And I know we're doing a little bit of this with the Board on Aging, but it's very drop in the bucket right now. I think it's $200 a year or something is the caregiver support, which, is really just token. How do we build something more robust and more reflective of the value that unpaid caregivers are bringing? And I will say, just to Fred's point, I think the technology is making that a lot easier because, we know we actually can probably at this point even estimate, down to like the hour dollar value of what that caregiver is doing. It's like, oh, you did 10 hours worth of work that had a wage and a value in your area.
Yeah. And as complicated as this whole topic seems, I mean, a giant portion of it is keeping people from falling and having early diagnosis of cognitive issues. So it's like, and that's all like before the costly stuff happens. So to the extent we can address some of those areas, we may be looking at reduced costs and everything we're talking about, the private insurance and any public program.
I see Walter has his hand up.
Okay, thank you for caregivers. Thank you for bringing it up because I was gonna. Everyone's been talking about we need care, who needs care, when they need care, how long will they need care. Well, somebody's gonna have to do that. Most of the people in the families, based on my 37 years in the financial planning business, don't want to do it. They'd rather pass it on to someone else. Some people are very generous with their families and will do that. But most people would rather pay somebody else. Caregivers get paid, I think, $11.50, $13.50 an hour to start right now. It's back-breaking work. It's work that, as we now know from the pandemic, that could be full of disease that can be transferred from one to those caregivers. They don't get insurance. They don't have benefits. And so someone's going to have to take care of them because caregivers, with the generation that's coming up that's going to explode in the next 5 to 7 years, somebody's going to have to take care of those people, and they're the people that we're last to call, we're last to think of, and they get treated the worst. That's based on real personal experience, personally in my lifestyle, in my whole life, and just in my practice. Thank you.
Walter, I will only disagree with one thing you said, which is that we did just raise the PCA minimum wage to $14.25 and going up to $15.25 by July, but everything else I agree with.
Hallelujah.
And by the way, that's thanks to a lot of legislators on this call made that happen. So I'll acknowledge their participation.
Thank you to the legislators. Thank you very much, but it's still not enough.
So this is John. I would like to make a couple of comments. First of all, that idea that Fred brought up about technology, I think, is key. There are companies out there, if you look at it, and by the way, the long-term care insurance industry is looking at that in a great deal of depth these days. They're really trying to find technology solutions that could help solve some of those problems. I've seen some of the companies myself. Some of them are great. One particular that does a great job of cognitive impairment assessment out of now my new home in California. They're up a little bit further north than I am, but There's a lot of great technology that's emerging out there, and I do think that it's going to change things dramatically. One thing I wanted to do was, and we talk about solutions, and Chris Giese, I assume you're still here. Chris and I had a really interesting conversation that related to the demographics of people and how potentially there should be different solutions for different demographic groups, in particular potentially different income groups, or different ways of treating them. And so, Chris, I kind of wanted you to talk just for a minute about that, because I actually think that some of that conversation kind of is helpful, because one of the things we keep talking about is this care is very, very expensive, and it is very expensive, particularly the lower down on the economic sphere that you are. But there may be different ways to think about and analyze some of those groups, Dan, that you were talking about that are kind of in the middle, and be thinking, well, if somebody fits into this sort of a demographic, psychographic profile, Plan A is the right one for them. And if they fit into this one, Plan B might be a better one for them, and that kind of thing. So, and may have different ways of kind of balancing those out in ways that ultimately should be transparent to the consumers. In other words, you don't go into the details of all of that. It's more like A, B, C, that kind of thing. So, Chris, you had some thoughts on that. I know you've looked at it and thought about it. Maybe you could talk a little bit more.
Yeah, I think I touched on it just a little bit before, but maybe it's helpful to even think about almost an example. So if everybody could be divided into two groups, say we had low income and high income individuals. Again, I think one of the ways to frame up, and before you dive into a lot of the plan details, is to really think about what the overall objective is for those groups of individuals. So for example, for low-income individuals, maybe first is trying to come to a consensus around, all right, a low-income individual should have 50% of their care financed by the government. They'll pay 10% out of pocket, and then private market picks up 40% of the share. Versus high-income individuals, maybe that looks a little different. Maybe the government is picking up still 40 to 50% of the share, but now individuals who are higher income, maybe they have higher out-of-pocket expenses. So maybe they're paying 30 or 40% of the cost of care. So I think some of those, there's lessons to be learned, with the experience of the private market. I think there's lessons to be learned from the state of Washington's plan. I think there's lessons to be learned from just other products as well. You think about, the Affordable Care Act. We're starting to get familiar with these metallic tiers around actuarial value. When somebody, the lower the income you are, the less you have to pay out of pocket. And if you're higher income, you ultimately are going to pay more out of pocket for your care. So I think, once you kind of settle on those objectives around, depending on, say, using income as an example, what the shares should look like amongst the different sectors to kind of handle, the financing, then perhaps you can start to reverse engineer solutions that kind of fit those objectives. I think sometimes we tend to skip ahead a little bit and start to think about, as an actuary, obviously I love to get in the details. We kind of skip ahead to the design, and then at the back end look at, well, how does it impact, all of these different, stakeholders, where perhaps, trying to get more consensus around, where do we see overall, the role of different sectors sharing around the financing of an individual's care, and then designing solutions that meet those objectives. So I think, John, hopefully that touched on what you're hoping I would touch on. So.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, and it's not a solution per se in the sense that exactly how we would do it, but one of the things that is great is that we have actually, with the money that Dan was talking about, there's a chunk of money there to do some of this kind of demographic and analysis, and sort of really start to look at some of the different demographic trends, and not just look at it from a macro standpoint, which is important, but not the be all end all. Looking at sort of micro groups as well, and sort of seeing where where these people in the middle income, kind of can fit in, and how they compare to folks with the higher incomes and folks with the lower income. So we have some money to look at that. That's the first thing, and just thinking differently about kind of how we target. I mean, in marketing, everything is all about targeting. And so, so understanding some of the different targeting ways to target different groups, I think, is an important piece of it. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that out because I thought it was an interesting way to think about things. So.
And there's a item in the chat about the success of having people plan for retirement versus long-term care. I'd be interested in others' views, but like planning for retirement sounds like a lot more fun than planning to be disabled. I'm not sure if that's like the driving reason. I always thought like, people have money, they need to take care of their short-term needs. If there's money left over, then they plan for retirement. And then if there's money left over, they plan for long-term care. Is that like to Walter and others, is that how it really plays out, or?
Generally speaking, that's the way it plays out. But back in the 90s, in the late 80s and 90s up until the early 2000s, people were willing to talk about it because it was unique and new, and it wasn't very expensive. It was within, most people's discretionary income to pay that additional premium. And they had fantastic coverage. And Minnesota, by statute, had some great guarantees set into the long-term care plans, like the 5% benefit increase. That was, and it had, if it was a benefit increase, it had to be 5%. So it's just the idea that it was easy, and we know we're going to have to take care of this eventually. So let's get it now, because it's not really that bad. But man, after the 2000s, it's like the sky fell in. That's all I have to say.
So can I add one comment based on a word I heard used a couple of times over the course of the day, which is disabled, which is, again, painting things in a negative context. So actually what's been helping have conversations around long-term care is people don't want to picture themselves as disabled. So you talk about, so with medical advances, people are living longer lives. One of the things that happens as you age most often is at some point you'll start to become frail. That's hard to argue. People can argue that they're gonna have a cognitive issue, or that they're gonna have some disabling event. It's hard to argue that if you live a long time, you're gonna become frail and start needing help with daily activities. And once you explain that those daily activities are your ADLs, then they understand what long-term care is. It's not laying in a hospital bed flat on your back waiting to die. It's you can live a long and productive life and still need help with some of those things to get your day started before you go teach, English as a second language in your retirement or something. There's all the positive that we have to share as opposed to the negative framing.
Thanks, Craig. You said it perfectly, and the only time I talk about disabled is if I'm talking about disability income insurance.
Well, not to be too depressing at the end of the day on a Friday, but we have just gone through a 2-year period where this virus came out of nowhere and created a disabling condition, and 10% of the people that got the illness, it's called long COVID. We have no idea what long COVID is going to present as far as chronic illness or long-term care needs. I mean, it's completely unknown, and I think it's the kind of thing that should spur people to really think hard about what kind of long-term care coverage do I need, in addition to retirement or alongside these other things. because you just really don't know. And again, I think it's a way to talk to people is to say, isn't it important to you to have something other than just your family members taking care? Isn't it important to, protect the assets like Representative Keel was talking about, even if they're modest?
So we, on the agenda, we had up until 3:10 kind of dedicated to legislator comments, and we've kind of like just gone into the next agenda item too. So Dan, you might want to give an opportunity for the legislators to take advantage of that, but they could always ask questions during the next agenda item too.
Yeah, I think we should go to the next agenda item, and certainly if legislators do have something else they want to ask, let's touch on that too. We'll give them back the mic.
Okay. So maybe we can get to some of my questions for the actuaries that came up. One is for Chris, where, as actuaries, we think of stuff that makes programs or insurance more expensive versus less expensive. And one is, the cost per person tends to be less if a program is mandatory versus if, the healthy people can opt out and you're stuck with the sick people. But a question I have about long-term care is, do you have a sense for like how skilled a particular person is in evaluating whether they're a high or low long-term care risk? I know for like life insurance, it's like if you have family members who have had heart attacks, you're probably a higher risk. But for long-term care, it's like there are ways to die that lead to a sudden death with no long-term care costs, and then there's stuff that like leads to like a long case of long-term care. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, maybe I'll talk about it just in terms of kind of the broad maybe principles of insurance. I think we've talked a lot about trying to plan early. So the longer I think individuals wait, if on average people are waiting to plan until they're in their 50s and 60s, they're probably starting to have a better idea of their long-term care needs, although probably not perfect compared to what are my healthcare needs 1 year later, but probably starting to have a better sense for what their needs are going to be, versus if we looking at individuals in their 20s and 30s, how good are they going to be able to predict care 50 or 60 years down the road. So when you think about as it relates to insurance and designing solutions around that, the longer the period you can have between when somebody needs care and when somebody starts planning or signing up for care, that creates more certainty and helps rates be more stable and creates a program that's more actuarially sound. So that's where I touched on a little bit before, something like the Class Act program, where if you can choose, it's completely voluntary, and you could choose to sign up for a program, and you decide ultimately you're going to do what's in your best interest, and you're going to sign up for that program as close to the time when you need care as possible. So designing solutions that kind of minimize that, we like to throw around this term adverse selection, I think is really important. So the longer period you have, again, more broadly and not to oversimplify, the longer period you have between when somebody is going to claim benefits versus when they enroll or sign up for benefits really helps mitigate that influence.
Thanks. And as a follow-up, you helped out with the Washington State program. Was there, can you give an example of like, just from like a cost per person perspective of like, with private insurance, they do underwriting, and then if you're deemed to be a low risk, you get a lower premium rate. If you're a high risk, then it's a higher premium rate. So that's something not allowed in health insurance anymore, but for long-term care. And it might be likely that some people are just not allowed to buy a policy. But with a government program, they're typically designed where like everybody is invited, like people aren't kicked out because they're deemed to be a high risk. So do you have a sense of like how much that increased like the cost per person from everybody kind of being invited versus like the higher cost, higher risk people either being booted out or paying a higher rate?
So certainly, if you think from an actuary's perspective, it's a whole lot easier to rate a program if everybody's in. So the 100% mandatory, there's a lot more certainty in terms of setting rates. I think you touched on a really good point, Fred, that once you introduce voluntary aspects within, say, a mandatory program or start to give choice, that does create additional uncertainty and as you think about making projections. So, for example, if we think about the private insurance opt-out and the influence it had on Washington, it's hard to, get in the minds of a consumer and around why they might choose to opt out. I think there's, did somebody opt out because they simply wanted to avoid the tax? I don't care if this is a good value or not. I am going to opt out regardless. Or maybe people just chose to opt out because they were healthier and they felt like they could get a better deal. So maybe healthier risks, so to speak, went to the private market. So, well, as an actuary, whenever there is uncertainty, one of the ways we try and deal with that is run sensitivity testing. So that might sound like a really boring thing, but trying to understand, what if only 100,000 people opted out? What if 1.5 million people opted out? And what kind of impact does that have on the program? And then trying to understand the characteristics of the people that opted out. Do we feel like if they opted out, maybe there's some presumption that they were healthy because they just passed underwriting? Looking at what is their income profile? Did they opt out because they're a higher wage earner? And, I think Greg had pointed out that, so the tax is not capped. So perhaps there was a tax avoidance thing. So really understanding the characteristics of that cohort and kind of slicing out their kind of cost per person, then you kind of are left with kind of what's remaining covered by the social insurance pool.
Great. Thanks a lot, Chris. And looks like we have a question that you're probably best equipped to answer. Do you have an idea of, in Washington state, like the percent of the benefit pool that was intended to be allocated to administration versus paying the benefits?
So I don't know if they kind of, from an administrative or fiscal standpoint, have formally come out with anything on that. Though what we had kind of priced for and maybe I should use the term priced for a little bit more carefully. We did feasibility studies to help inform the work. We did not ultimately set the rate for the program. But when we did our feasibility study work, we had budgeted for roughly 7% of premiums to go toward administration expenses.
Okay, that's good to know. I know when we evaluate the pricing of long-term care insurance products, a lot of the early products were originally priced, about 40% of the premium was allocated towards expenses, commissions, taxes, profits. That's probably come down in recent years. But that, where I mentioned, there may be, because it's an unhealthier pool that would tend to be in a government program that would tend to drive up costs, perhaps a lower administration would be something to drive down costs. Does that sound right?
Yeah. It's an interesting exercise too, when you think about, for the private market, there's been studies and shown that for every dollar of premium, how does that get divvied up between different expenses? There was one, I think, the private market panel before comment around, having contractual obligations as part of a private market, contract versus the government perhaps doesn't have that same structure. One of the things that kind of dovetails on that a little bit is thinking about how you evaluate a government program or a social insurance program's solvency over time. And so as an actuary, when I think about, and we like to throw around terms like margin, like how much cushion do you need if inevitably when we're making projections 75 years down the road, we're going to be wrong. So how much cushion do you need if things don't go as expected? So I know that's, insurance rules and regulation obviously deal with that. a lot, trying to bring some of that same perspective when you think about a social insurance program that, perhaps, best estimate is one thing to kind of think through, but again, inevitably things will go off track or look different than what we had projected. So what are the strategies around, being able to have some margin or cushion in those cases?
Yeah. And I should clarify that it was the original plan of the private insurance companies for 40% to go into those categories, but due to the increased costs, all of the money has gone to benefits and more, and that's what's led to the rate increases. So I think I've talked enough, and we'll see if others in the audience have questions.
I'll just offer just one other. I don't want this to be centered on just Washington, what they've done, because obviously every state is unique and different. I think, as you think about the state and their demographics and their wealth and income characteristics, their health characteristics, their mortality rates, and what programs are already in place, there isn't one size fits all. So, I think Washington is a good straw man to give some context, but yeah, absolutely. Hopefully nothing's coming across today that, Washington is the route to necessarily go. I think, part of the private panel talked a little bit about this before, which was kind of this whole front end versus back end kind of concept. I thought maybe I'd just share a little bit more color around why Washington landed on a front end. I did have the fortunate opportunity to sit in on some of those stakeholder meetings that, the 3 or 4 years leading up to before the legislation was passed. And ultimately, they kind of landed on a front end plan. I think for some of the reasons that we've touched on, when you think about one of the most difficult times and the spectrum of when you need long-term care is really when you cross over that threshold when you can no longer care for yourself. So it's a very stressful time. I went through it with both of my parents and trying to understand what's available, where does the Medicaid program fit in, and what personal finances or insurance coverage that you have. As a caregiver, how do you kind of work through all that? So it's a very stressful time when you first kind of cross over that threshold. So Washington's kind of general plan was we wanted to have some money available. Again, not a comprehensive solution, but having some money available right at that front part of when care is needed. So again, there's pros and cons and trade-offs of every design, but just a little bit of context of one of the reasons why kind of Washington landed on the front end design.
Yeah. So Chris, was part of the thinking that if the care was provided on the front end, it would lower cost to the state on the back end?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think they're hoping for some of that. The other thing that they projected out are, when you think about if there are some savings on the front end, how does that impact, say, the Medicaid program? Are there savings that could be generated to the Medicaid program? How much of that, then perhaps do you take credit for as part of a new social insurance program? How do you potentially coordinate, Medicaid programs share 50% of the cost roughly with the federal government. So if you're saving money for the Medicaid program, how do you recoup some of those costs that the federal government is saving, as part of a state-based program? So, definitely, as you think about those kind of considerations, it's definitely something that was on their minds.
Sounds good. Any questions? I mean, we at Own Your Future, I mean, we've talked about the life stage product a little bit. We also have the other major initiative with the what I'll call the upfront services to help people out with meals and prescriptions and stuff before somebody would have a more serious long-term care need. Do you think it makes sense to talk about that a little bit? Or see if Dan or Lorraine have a thought on that, or John.
Yeah, Lorraine, you've been very quiet.
You're on mute, Lorraine.
You're muted. Am I now on live? Okay. Yeah. Well, this has been just fascinating to me, having worked on these similar kinds of issues for a long time. But, there were some interesting things talked about in terms of what happened in Washington, what we might want to avoid, what we might want to look at a little bit more. And in answer to your question, Fred, one of the things that we have started working more on is the whole issue of in-home supportive services and how we can keep people in those homes, because we know that the family is easy. They can take care of their elderly better if it's in the home. And so with the help of some of the funding that we have gotten, we're starting to take a better look at the kinds of services that can be provided in the home, how much they're tied into saving money. Just as you said, Fred, we now have a couple of organizations in the metro area that have really done a great job of documenting the actual dollars that you can spend if you prevent a fall. For example, if you prevent a fall for an older person in Minnesota and you prevent that, you can save $27,000. They're coming up with some really good data that I think can help us make the case for people who, are still kind of on the fence about how we can take care of people really effectively. Technology is going to help dramatically in that same area. So in answer to your question, we still are looking at the whole issue of in-home, because we know that is more affordable and better for people. They want to stay there as long as possible.
Thanks, Lorraine. And John just popped up on video.
Yeah, I did. A couple things that we haven't really talked too much about, but we did talk a little bit about technology. But one thing that I'm very interested in is the idea of what I'll call pre-claim interventions, and I would be interested too in what some of the private insurers would say about that. I know there's been some work at the NAIC that has gone in to talk about that. When it comes to something like Alzheimer's, once you're severely cognitively impaired, there's not a lot that can be done to mitigate that. And that is also true of frailty. When you have 2 or more ADLs, a lot of people have 1, but when you have 2 or more, you're not in great shape. And so the real question is, if we are able to do pre-claim interventions, and it's probably a much better title than pre-claim interventions, but the idea of working with people ahead of time, maybe it's part of the health plan, maybe it's some other way that we incent, maybe it's some of these assessments that we are able to do. But if we're able to do that and somehow mitigate the conditions a little bit, so the people, as they grow older, may not need quite as much long-term care and can stay at home, it seems to me that that's a strategy that we really ought to be looking long and hard at. So just a thought on that.
Yeah, we at the NAIC, we spent the entire year in 2021 working on that issue. Some companies had already, some insurance companies who had a lot of life and long-term care insurance on the books had already started programs where they would spend money to help ensure their policyholders don't fall. And maybe they had similar data than that was said before, like they knew like if the person didn't fall, it would save the insurance company $27,000 in claims or something like that. Yeah. So there were some issues to work out, and we came out with a really good document in December. It's posted on the NAIC website that shows like why it's not considered rebating, why it's probably not a tax issue with the federal definition of long-term care and stuff like that. There are a lot of issues to work through, but I think we did, and it's really going to encourage the long-term care insurance companies to continue and expand on those efforts. And I think that there are lessons we as government can learn from them, but I also think like the insurance companies are learning from similar programs that are happening with Medicaid. So I think that's a huge growth area. Okay. And I noticed that Representative Keel has her hand up.
You know, thank you very much. As we have this conversation about how to recognize the need to keep people from following their care, I'm a very aggressive daughter. I go to many doctor's appointments. I am involved in observing what needs to happen to my parents who are in their 80s, and they're still independent. So, but they're struggling with certain things, and I picture this in an insurance perspective, or a care. You know, who decides what? How do we, as a state, identify when people need certain things? And you know, I know the county comes in if you think that they need more care, and there's an assessment made. But I think a lot of times that assessment, while it's in the doctor's office, may not carry between the doctor's office and the actuality of what happens, either because the person themselves don't understand the challenges they're having and where they might go. Because, you know, there's a reality of how independent we want to be, for how long we want, you know. A very few people want to rely on others to come in and the reality is a lot of families have a hard time dealing with parents. You know, a lot of I've experienced. I have a lot of sister-in-laws. I helped with my father-in-law, and they were reticent, and not because they didn't care. I really honestly think it's because it gets hard personally to start challenging a family member. You know, should you really do this? How do you talk to them? How do you respectfully let them make choices when you see that their choices are detrimental to their care? But I see that gap between the doctor's office or the identifier, let's put it that way, whoever identifies, hey, there's a problem here, they could fall, and then being able to help them. And I'm really not asking a question. You might have an answer. My thought is, how do we deal with that? How consistently, how do we do it? We're never going to solve every problem, but making sense? Is that anyway?
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense, and that it's a lot of what I learned in the past year through the NAIC efforts in evaluating these what are called, John called them claim intervention, but the new terminology is like long-term care wellness programs, and so insurance companies who have an interest in keeping their policyholders healthy, their interaction with the policyholders used to be only after the event, after the person had 2 ADLs, they're frail, had cognitive issues, and say, okay, we're going to pay your claim. But they've gotten a lot more aggressive in both just reaching out, making a phone call or an email to the policyholder saying, hey, what's your current situation? Do you need help? And also identifying like a son or daughter who would help in that. So that's their strategy, and I think that's something we can learn from, is kind of being a little bit more proactive and being the identifier. I'll tell you about another thing that insurance companies do, and this is a little more controversial, is there's all this big data out there, and they're able to identify through these big data, calculations, like who is more likely to be at high risk than someone else. So some companies will use that and target those people and say, hey, we have this data showing that you're probably a high risk. We're going to offer to intervene. There have been a lot of privacy issues and issues like that, but that's what, some insurance companies are actually doing. I think as a net, it's probably helpful because there's a little trade-off with data privacy, but if it does prevent a fall or something like that, maybe it's a net benefit. But those are two examples of what's going on.
Hey, this is Steve Spurka. Can I just chime in, Fred? I just want to add to your comments. So first, I would say, from an industry perspective, everything you said is exactly true. There's a lot of energy in the industry around pre-claim interventions to try to, keep people safe. And I would also say there's innovation going on from the earlier discussion around caregivers and what can insurance companies do to support the caregiver, recognizing, if that caregiver is healthy and able to take care of that, could lower claim costs, but also just from it just makes the product better if that's there. So, and just to go back to the innovation point, Fred, you had mentioned insurance companies that are doing this. The tech industry is investing heavily in trying to figure out ways to improve care, help people stay home monitoring, and I'm not kidding. I probably get an email or a phone call from one of these firms at least once a week, talking about, different tools and things. So it's I'm glad you guys are thinking about this, because this is definitely a space. This is where the puck is going. So it's something for us to keep in mind. But everything you said, Fred, is exactly what what we're experiencing in the industry.
So Steve, this is John O'Leary again. Hey, so how can the state help out in a situation like that? How can we, is there anything we can do to kind of make, kind of encourage this kind of thing, encourage the use of technologies and pre-claim types of stuff?
Well, so one thing I'll say at the state level is sometimes, to what extent can these benefits be covered under a policy can be gray, or, and Fred, actually some of your comments of the discussions at the NEIC level, I think are helpful, of like giving insurers more clarity of what you can and cannot do. I think that can really help foster it, because I'll tell you, the discussions we have around, hey, could we do this or that, often quickly get to, okay, what are the regulations allow? So that's the first thing that comes to mind when you say that. I don't know if I'd have to give it some more thought, but that's kind of my quick answer to your question, John.
No, that's helpful to know. I mean, we've known for a while that regulations and particularly the Model Act are areas that a lot of times restrict innovation. So I think you pointing that out is really helpful, Steve.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that. There are so many aspects of long-term care laws. There's tax preference, and there's the partnership and the federal definition of long-term care and stuff like that. Like any legislation that even touches on private insurance issues, it's got to be really carefully crafted. And I mean, that's a reason why we've been talking about life stage for like 6 years, is like, we needed the right expertise around the country to make sure we formulated wording, which I think has been worked out. It's been reviewed by Robin and stuff, to make sure we're not going to cause harm to any policyholders or other types of insurance and so on and so forth. So, as we think about various programs, we just need to think about that. And I'll also say, my vision, if there was a public program, is there'd probably be some sort of waiver where the state would receive money because of Medicaid savings and stuff like that. So it's a huge picture that all fits together. And if we're going to do something to impact one area, we've got to think about the big picture. And there aren't that many people who understand the big picture. But fortunately, it's a great reason to have a group like this, because out of 40 people, at least one of us would speak up and say, not so fast, you got to think about this.
Just in terms of waivers, you really can't expect to see any savings recognized by the federal government beyond a 5-year horizon. The way that Medicaid waivers are negotiated with the Office of Management and Budget, the CMS. So we did renew a waiver back in 2020, right before the pandemic, for our alternate care program. That was that had to be budget neutral within a 5-year horizon of 2020 to 2025. So you don't get, they won't recognize any of that. Now, maybe that's changed, or maybe there's new law that would help with that. I think those are some of the questions that we're going to be doing some research and development on, as what kind of caregiving services could we buy that we would get credit for as a state. That's part of the problem. Part of my frustration is we save Medicare a lot of money if we do better benefits on caregiving. And I haven't gotten the fiscal note savings from Medicare in any of my proposals.
Sad. But some of this is already happening. I'm thinking of, is it a assisted living place in the metro that has a robot named Lucy or something like that, and Lucy picks up all the dishes after she brings them to the table, and then she brings those back to the kitchen after people are done eating. And more and more people are turning to that, and we've got lots of shortages too. So it's happening, because it fills a need that is growing in many facilities as well as in home care. So we're going to see more of that, I think, as we look to the future.
I think Congresswoman Keel has her hand up. So.
Thank you. My only concern, Larry, I get that technology entirely. In fact, funny thing, my father and I were actually discussing that today on the phone, and but my concern is the human touch. The human, I'm really concerned about that. I watch. I talk a lot about background family and stuff, but I watch my parents live out on the farm where they have lived their whole married life and very little in town ever or anywhere else socially. So they moved into a 55 plus, and my mother said, "Your dad's not, social. He's not going to enjoy it." Well, he would say he's not enjoying it because he's not on the farm, but he is really enjoying it because he's in that building where he is running around helping all the widows that are there. In fact, he was worried about being in their apartment because what would people think, including my mother. And I said, well, she hasn't complained, so I wouldn't worry about it. And she's thrilled he's doing things that are active and helping people. And he's, very helpful. But I just, technology is great. But that human touch and that visual, even if I see something on a screen, that visual, even in the building, I've helped many people, and it's just the observation of what you see at that point, and it's not a caregiving building. So unless the resident sees something, nobody's reporting it or handling it. It doesn't necessarily mean anything other than helping somebody, but and they're very helpful to each other. Don't get me wrong, they do a lot of things, but the robot thing I get. I mean, dishes can be done by anybody. That's entirely, a fine thing. But that human touch of talking to people, seeing that they are going to fall because they're not steady, simply because something's in their way that they didn't see or whatever. You can see, I'm sure that I have my concerns, and yet I think we need to go ahead.
We have to keep that in mind all the time, and to the extent that some of that can take care of the dishwashing and all, so that you as the daughter-in-law have time to visit with them and to continue the social part, because that is a little harder to do with Lucy.
Yes.
But yes. If you think about it ahead of time, there may be ways that you can mitigate it a bit. But I'm with you.
Yep. Even the check-ins, even the good morning, how are you doing?
Yes.
Just those check-ins. I promised my father 20 years ago I would never put anything in his bathroom. I said, you don't want me to see it, and I don't want to see it. So But the point being is, you know, trying to be funny about things, but I want to know that you got up and you're okay and you're not, you know, and there's certainly 2 of them. So, and funny thing, if someone falls in that building, there's at least 3 people that are checking to see why the noise was there. So I see that. I see in my district, I see a lot of people isolated. And that worries me. And when we get a lot of snow and yeah, that's huge. And I know people check, neighborhoods check and stuff, but yeah, I would feel terrible if I found somebody laying there for a long time. So.
Thanks for that comment.
I agree with Representative Keel. We know that the telehealth sort of access has not been evenly, you know, accessible. People have struggled with the telehealth. Older adults have had a hard time, you know, having meaningful conversations with their healthcare providers. I think the technology has its benefits, but it also has its limits. Yeah. We in a different conversation, we had a very interesting meeting with Allina, and there's other hospitals that are doing this too. I'm not promoting Allina here, but they're doing a hospital at home program just sort of recent in the last 2-3 years that is combines a lot of technology, but it still does have a once a day visit. And this is not home care. This is actually acute care level need. You get a paramedic that brings you home from the hospital, that sets you up, and then you have a full-time biometric monitoring plus a nurse visit, and it's still more cost effective than actually being in the hospital. It's pretty innovative.
Interesting.
I think the whole point is to avoid the hospital altogether. I think that's kind of what we've been talking about too, and I think that's how Washington ended up with such a, you know, front end product. And the more front end you go, the cheaper it gets. The less needs you have, the more you can maybe get to a point where you're not even calling it cares, you're calling it services, because you don't have a need for cares. You have someone come to shovel your driveway when it snows, and you have someone come to take out your trash and, you know, do your vacuuming, so you don't have that fall. So I just wanted to show my support and chime in on how much the going in front end really does save everybody in the end.
Good point.
There's a question in the chat, I think, is maybe, I don't know if that's to me and Fred or to the legislators about can you threaten new taxes? That might be a tough sell right now because we have a pretty large budget surplus. I don't know if we would really get away with that, but that's an interesting idea about the incentive structure.
And there was a question about the size of the Washington program. I mean, my guess is that, you know, they're already having issues with the payroll tax. If you had a bigger program, it would be even more payroll tax. So it was probably finding a balance, and the 36,500, if I do the math right, is $100 a day for a year, which is, so there's probably like a part to make it easily understandable and a part to keep the tax as low as possible. But Chris can add on to that.
Yeah, maybe just one clarification. So the program does have inflation protection. So it's tied to a Washington CPI measure. What that measure will be and how it will grow over time, we'll see. So maybe that on average might be less than the typical inflation protection you'd find in a private insurance policy, but they do have some protection. There's probably also no magical answer here as well. I think, you know, maybe some of we've talked about today is some is better than nothing. And ultimately, and Dan, you just touched on this a little bit, there are political realities and constraints to all of this. So, you know, if you wanted to have a $150,000 benefit front end paid by a payroll tax, is that politically feasible? Because that will be substantially more than, you know, 0.5% or so. So I think there's a lot of trade-offs and kind of, you know, for, like I said, in a perfect world, if we could have a lot of benefits for very little cost, I think everybody would be on board for that. But the reality is, when you're thinking about these types of designs, there will be some difficult decisions, you know, kind of to balance those trade-offs.
And remember, like you know, if I brought the design of how Medicaid works today to the legislators and said, hey, let's build a back-end benefit, and the only people who qualify are the people who spend down everything they have, and then we'll do a back-end catastrophic comprehensive benefit of all their costs forever.
Yeah.
No legislator would vote for that. I would never get that passed, but that's the system we have.
That's where we're at. Well, I guess armed with the information we have from all of the people we've heard today, which was excellent, as well as the things that we are trying to avoid because we're not doing what Washington has done, we'll have all of that in our notes and actually recorded so that when we finish putting that all together, we'll be able to take a look at you know, the many recommendations and issues that we talked about, and wonderful conversation about some of these things that, you know, are happening, and we need to be involved in the discussion.
Thank you, everybody. Any other closing comments? Any last thoughts? Inspirations count too.
I was going to suggest, Robin, anything from your end, either you or any of the other folks on your side?
No, just very much appreciate all the participation and look forward to an ongoing conversation.
But no, I wanted to just reiterate, I really appreciate the time and the conversation. And Robin, you can give me a call and we can talk more about what we need to do. It is very much a part of my personal life, but I think very much a part of the state issues that we have. I'm seeing it greatly, whether it's constituencies or families or whatever, and I'm very concerned about the fact that we have that those options to help us plan for our aging and our health care, because, you know, that's a gamble in itself. We don't know. We have no idea if we're going to walk across the street and not come home, or be here when we're 100 and need a lot of help. So, you know, you just don't know. So
yeah,
we need to have as much.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Thanks, Representative Keel.
Thank you guys for coming. This has been great. This has been really helpful.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone.